The drill bit scraped against metal, sending sparks flying in the dim underground chamber. Dr. Elena Rodriguez wiped sweat from her forehead and stepped back from the strange pod buried beneath 300 feet of Colorado rock. "This is incredible," she whispered to her assistant, Dr. Kevin Park. "The metal composition is unlike anything we've seen from this period. It's almost like they knew about materials we only discovered 50 years ago." Kevin ran his scanner over the smooth surface. "Elena, look at this. The power source is still active. After 230 years, this thing is still running." Elena's hands trembled as she cleared away the last bits of debris. The pod was larger than the others they had found in the facility. Through a small window, she could see a human face, peaceful and young, suspended in blue liquid. "Get Commander Grant on the comm," she said. "He needs to see this." 3 hours later, Commander Lewis Grant stood in the underground chamber, his face grim. Behind him, Captain Amy Foster took notes on her tablet while trying not to stare at the sleeping figure. "In the pod." "You're absolutely certain he's alive?" Grant asked. "The bio readings are perfect," Elena replied. "Heart rate, brain activity, cellular integrity. It's like he was frozen yesterday, not 2 centuries ago." Grant walked around the pod, studying the sleeping man. The face was young, maybe 28, with short brown hair and strong features. Even in sleep, there was something hard about his expression, something that reminded Grant of old war photographs. "What do we know about this facility?" Grant asked. Kevin pulled up his research on his tablet. It was called Project Lazarus. Built in 2155, right before the Third World War ended. According to the records we found, they put their best soldiers in these pods, hoping future generations could wake them up when they were needed again. "And we're the future generations," Amy said quietly. Grant nodded. "The question is, do we need him?" Elena looked at the pod. "Sir, with respect, this man is a living piece of history. He fought in humanity's darkest war. The things he knows, the experiences he has, we can't just leave him sleeping." "The Coalition won't like this," Grant said. "They've spent 200 years believing we've moved past our violent history. A soldier from the Third World War might change their minds about us." Amy stepped forward. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing, sir. The Coalition barely tolerates us as it is. They won't let us expand beyond our solar system. They treat us like children who can't be trusted with real responsibility." Grant considered this. The Galactic Coalition had welcomed humanity after the Third World War ended, but only after they promised to give up their aggressive ways. For over 2 centuries, humans had lived under Coalition oversight, their military reduced to a small peacekeeping force, their expansion limited to a few colonies in their home system. "Wake him up," Grant decided. "But keep it quiet. I want to talk to him before anyone else knows he exists." The awakening process took 6 hours. Elena monitored every step as the pod slowly warmed the frozen body and began flushing the preservation fluid from his system. When the pod finally opened with a soft hiss, Jake Morrison took his first breath in 231 years. His eyes opened suddenly, alert and focused. In one smooth motion, he sat up and looked around the chamber, taking in every detail. His gaze stopped on Elena, then moved to the others. "Ma'am," he said to Elena, his voice rough but steady. "What's the date?" "March 15th, 2387. Elena replied. Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "The war?" "Over," Grant said, stepping forward. "Has been for over 2 centuries. I'm Commander Lewis Grant, Earth Defense Force." Jake studied Grant's uniform, noting the unfamiliar insignia. "Defense Force? What happened to the Army?" "That's complicated," Grant said. "A lot has changed since your time. The world has changed. The galaxy has changed. Over the next few days, Jake learned about the new world he had awakened to. The Earth was clean and peaceful, its population stable at 2 billion. Wars were a thing of the past, settled by negotiation and compromise. Humanity was part of something called the Galactic Coalition, a group of alien species that worked together for peace and prosperity. Jake sat in the briefing room with Grant, Amy, and Elena, staring at images of alien worlds and species he had never imagined. The Vorthik looked like large reptiles, the Kralith resembled insects, and the Thalorians were tall and thin with blue skin. "These aliens," Jake said slowly, "they're in charge?" "Not exactly in charge," Grant said carefully, "but they guide our policies. They help us make decisions. They've taught us better ways to solve problems. Without fighting," Amy added. Jake looked at her. She was young, maybe 25, with bright eyes and an eager expression. She reminded him of the recruits he had trained before the war, except she seemed softer somehow, less aware of the world's dangers. "Captain," Jake said, "what's your military experience?" Amy straightened. "I graduated from the academy 3 years ago. I've served on peacekeeping missions to the outer colonies. I helped negotiate the mining dispute on Europa last year." "Have you ever been in combat?" Amy looked confused. "Combat? No, sir. There hasn't been any combat for over a century. The Coalition maintains peace throughout the galaxy." Jake turned to Grant. "Commander, what about you?" Grant shifted uncomfortably. "My background is in diplomacy and administration. The Defense Force is primarily concerned with search and rescue, disaster relief, and maintaining order in the colonies." "So, none of you have actually fought in a war?" "There are no wars anymore," Elena said. "The Coalition has moved beyond such primitive methods of settling disputes." Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the peaceful city of New Denver, with its clean buildings and orderly streets. People walked calmly along tree-lined paths, children played in parks, and everything looked safe and perfect. "It's beautiful," he said. "But what happens when someone doesn't want to negotiate? What happens when talking doesn't work?" "It always works," Amy said confidently. "The Coalition has systems in place. Mediation, economic incentives, cultural exchange programs. There's always a peaceful solution." Jake turned back to them. "Captain, in my time, we thought we had systems too. We had the United Nations, peace treaties, economic partnerships. We thought we had moved beyond war." "But you hadn't," Elena said. Double quotes, "No, we hadn't. And when the system broke down, when someone decided they wanted everything for themselves, we weren't ready. Millions died because we believed that peace was the natural state of things, that war was something that happened to other people in other times." Grant frowned. "The Coalition has maintained peace for over 2 centuries. The system works." "Maybe," Jake said. "But what's your backup plan?" Before anyone could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the building. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and an automated voice announced, "All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill." Grant's communicator buzzed with urgent messages. He read them quickly, his face growing pale. "What is it?" Elena asked. Grant looked up at them, his voice shaky. Long-range sensors had detected a massive fleet moving toward Coalition space. Unknown ships, unknown technology. They're big, they're fast, and they're not responding to any communication attempts. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach, a familiar feeling from his old life. How long until they reach Coalition territory? 6 months, maybe less. Jake nodded slowly. "Commander, I think you're about to find out why they kept soldiers like me frozen for the future." Amy stared at the alarm lights flashing overhead. "But this can't be happening. The galaxy is at peace." Everyone knows that war is impossible now. Jake looked at her with something like pity in his eyes. Captain, peace isn't the absence of the capacity for war. Peace is what you have when everyone agrees not to fight. But it only takes one side to change their mind. The alarms continued to sound as reports came in from across the galaxy. The unknown fleet was enormous, larger than anything the Coalition had ever seen. And they were coming straight for the heart of civilized space. Jake Morrison had been frozen for war, and after 2 centuries of sleep, war had finally come to find him. The activation chamber hummed with activity as more cryogenic pods were brought online. Jake watched through the observation window as another figure began to stir in the blue liquid. This pod was marked with a higher security code than his own. Who is she? Jake asked Elena, who was monitoring the revival process. According to the records, General Patricia Hayes. She was your commanding officer in Project Lazarus. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Patricia Hayes had been the best. Military mind of their generation, a woman who could see 3 moves ahead of any enemy. If anyone could help them understand what they were facing, it was her. The pod opened, and General Hayes sat up slowly, her gray eyes immediately scanning the room. Even after 2 centuries of sleep, she carried herself with the bearing of a soldier. She was older than Jake, maybe 40 when she was frozen, with short silver hair and a face marked by years of difficult decisions. Jake Morrison, she said, recognizing him immediately. Report. Ma'am, it's 2387. We've been asleep for over 200 years. Humanity is now part of something called the Galactic Coalition, and we have a problem. Patricia climbed out of the pod and accepted the clothes Elena offered her. What kind of problem? Commander Grant stepped forward. General Hayes, I'm Commander Lewis Grant. We're facing an unknown fleet approaching Coalition space. Our analysts estimate arrival in 6 months. Patricia studied Grant with the same look she used to give new recruits. Commander, what's your assessment of the threat? We're not sure yet. The fleet is large, but the Coalition has protocols for first contact situations. Our diplomatic corps is preparing several communication strategies. Patricia turned to Jake. What do you think? Jake had spent the last week studying Coalition military files. Ma'am, they don't have a military in any sense we would recognize. Their defense forces are basically police with spaceships. They haven't fought a real war in over 2 centuries. And the aliens? They seem to genuinely believe that everything can be solved through talking. They've built their entire civilization around the idea that war is impossible. Patricia was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Jake, show me everything you know about this incoming fleet. In the briefing room, Dr. Marcus Webb, a Coalition xenarchaeologist, presented his findings. He was a tall, thin man with nervous eyes and hands that shook slightly as he operated his holographic display. The ship designs are unlike anything in our databases, Webb said, but there are similarities to some very old artifacts we've found on dead worlds near the galactic rim. What kind of artifacts? Patricia asked. Webb hesitated. Well, General, we found evidence of an ancient civilization that once existed in this galaxy. They appear to have been aggressive. They strip-mined entire star systems and left nothing behind. When was this? Approximately 15,000 years ago. We call them the Devourers, though we don't know what they called themselves. Most Coalition historians believe they went extinct long ago. Jake leaned forward. What if they didn't go extinct? What if they just left? Webb looked uncomfortable. That's not the accepted theory. The evidence suggests they destroyed themselves through their own aggression. Dr. Webb, Patricia said calmly, in my experience, civilizations that survive long enough to build starships don't usually destroy themselves. They destroy others. Later that day, Jake and Patricia met with High Admiral Dizes, the Supreme Commander of Coalition forces. Dizes was a Krellith, resembling a large praying mantis with compound eyes and 4 arms. He spoke through a translation device that gave his words a mechanical quality. "Humans," Dizes said, his tone dismissive. "Your species has a history of seeing threats where none exist. The approaching fleet is most likely explorers or refugees. The Coalition has dealt with such situations many times." "Admiral," Patricia said, "what's your standard response to an unknown fleet?" "We send diplomatic vessels to establish communication. We offer assistance if needed. We extend an invitation to join the Coalition if they prove peaceful." "And if they're not peaceful?" Tice's compound eyes focused on her. "All species are capable of choosing peace when presented with the benefits of cooperation. Violence is always the result of misunderstanding or desperation." Jake had heard enough. "Admiral, with respect, what if they don't want to cooperate? What if they want to take what you have?" "Then we would negotiate. We would find what they need and provide it through trade or aid. The Coalition has vast resources. What if what they want is your worlds? Your people?" Dizes made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. "Human, such thinking is primitive. No advanced civilization would engage in conquest when cooperation is so much more efficient." After the meeting, Patricia and Jake walked through the corridors of Coalition headquarters. The building was beautiful, with flowing organic curves and large windows that showed the peaceful city outside. Everything was designed to promote calm and harmony. "Jake," Patricia said quietly, "we need to find someone who remembers the old wars." Their search led them to Elder Mordun, a Thylorian who was over 300 years old. He lived in a simple apartment in the oldest part of the Coalition capital, surrounded by books and artifacts from his long life. His blue skin was faded with age, and his large eyes held depths of memory. "You wish to know about the Devourers," he said before they even asked. "I wondered when someone would come asking." "You remember them?" Jake asked. "I was young when they came the first time. My world was one of the few that survived." Mordun's voice was soft but steady. "We survived because we learned to fight like you humans fight. Total war. No mercy. No negotiation." Patricia leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The Devourers do not want territory or resources, young general. They want everything. They consume entire civilizations. They eat the planets themselves. They leave nothing behind. But empty space. How did you stop them?" Mordun was quiet for a long moment. "We became like them. We sacrificed entire worlds to slow them down. We fought in ways that would horrify the current Coalition. We won because we were willing to pay any price for survival. And then? And then we buried that knowledge. We convinced ourselves that such methods were never necessary again. We built the Coalition on the promise that we would never again become monsters to fight monsters." Jake felt a chill. "But now they're back." "Yes, and the Coalition is not ready. They do not understand what is coming." The first contact came 3 weeks later. A Coalition diplomatic vessel, the Harmony's Light, encountered the edge of the unknown fleet. The ship's captain, a Vorthic named Sektar, followed standard protocols and transmitted a message of peaceful greeting. The response was immediate and devastating. The diplomatic ship was torn apart by weapons that turned its hull into molten metal. But before it died, the Harmony's Light transmitted detailed scans of what it had seen. Jake stood in the command center, watching the recorded images with growing horror. The enemy ships were massive, dark, and covered with strange organic growths. They moved in perfect formation, like a swarm of insects, and there were thousands of them. "My God," Amy whispered beside him. She had been studying the tactical reports. with Jake trying to understand military thinking. "How many ships are there?" "Current count is over 8,000 vessels," reported the Coalition intelligence officer. "And more are joining them from other vectors." Commander Grant looked pale. "The entire Coalition Defense Force has maybe 300 ships total." Patricia studied the formation patterns. "They're not exploring. This is an invasion force. Look at their positioning. Scouts on the edges, heavy assault ships in the center, support vessels in the rear. This is a military formation designed for conquest." High Admiral Theises appeared on the communication screen from his flagship. The destruction of the Harmony's light was clearly a misunderstanding. "We are preparing a larger diplomatic mission with better translation equipment." "Admiral," Jake said, "they just destroyed a peaceful ship without warning. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a declaration of war. Humans cannot understand the complexities of advanced interstellar relations," Theises replied. "Your species? Violent history clouds your judgment." Patricia stepped forward. "Admiral, I've seen this before. In my time, we called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war. They hit fast and hard before the enemy can organize a response. You have maybe 2 months before they reach Coalition space. 2 months is sufficient time to establish proper communication protocols," Theises said confidently. After the communication ended, Jake turned to Patricia. "They're not going to listen to us." "No, they're not. The Coalition has forgotten how to recognize a threat. They've been peaceful for so long that they can't imagine anything else." Amy looked between them. "So what do we do?" Patricia's expression was grim. "We prepare for war, whether the Coalition wants one or not. Because Jake is right about one thing. It only takes one side to start a fight." Jake nodded. "And from what we've seen, the Devourers started this fight 15,000 years ago. They're just finishing what they began." The reports continued to come in over the following days. The Devourer fleet was accelerating, moving faster than Coalition scientists thought possible. Long-range sensors detected more fleets converging from different directions. The first major battle happened at Kepler Station, a Coalition research outpost near the galaxy's edge. Jake watched the tactical display in horror as 3 Coalition fleets moved to intercept the Devourer advance. Admiral Theises commanded from his flagship, confident that superior Coalition technology would prevail. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the Coalition forces were completely destroyed. "Replay the final moments." Patricia ordered the technician operating the long-range sensors. The holographic display showed the last Coalition ship, a heavy cruiser called the Peacekeeper, surrounded by dozens of Devourer vessels. The enemy ships moved like a pack of wolves, coordinating their attacks with frightening precision. They didn't just destroy the cruiser. They swarmed over it, stripping away pieces of hull and machinery even as it exploded. "They're harvesting," Jake said quietly. "They're not just destroying our ships. They're taking them apart for materials." Commander Grant stood behind them, his face pale. Over 15,000 Coalition personnel were in those fleets, all dead. "Not dead," Elder Mordon said from his seat in the corner. "Consumed. The Devourers don't waste anything organic. They process it all." Amy turned away from the display, looking sick. "How can anything be so evil?" "They're not evil," Patricia said. "They're efficient. They've evolved to consume everything they encounter. It's not personal. It's just how they survive." Jake studied the battle recordings. "Look at their tactics. They use small ships as suicide weapons to break our formations. Then the larger ships move in to finish the job. They don't care about losses as long as they win." "The Coalition doesn't understand this," Patricia continued. "Our commanders try to preserve every ship, every life. The Devourers sacrifice thousands of their own vessels without hesitation." Commander Grant activated his communicator. I'm calling an emergency meeting with Coalition leadership. They have to understand what we're facing." The meeting took place in the Coalition's Grand Assembly Hall, a beautiful chamber designed to promote harmony and discussion. Representatives from dozens of species sat in elegant curved seating, their various forms creating a colorful display of galactic diversity. High Admiral Dizes stood at the center podium, his mechanical voice echoing through the chamber. "Recent engagement at Kepler Station was unfortunate, but we must not abandon our principles. The enemy fleet may be confused or desperate. We will send more diplomatic missions." Jake couldn't stay quiet any longer. He stood up from the human. "Delegation seating. Admiral, they just killed 15,000 Coalition citizens without warning. They harvested the wreckage like scrap metal. This isn't confusion. It's conquest." A Vorthic representative hissed softly. "The human speaks from his primitive instincts. His species has always seen violence where peaceful solutions exist." "Peaceful solutions?" Patricia stood beside Jake. "They destroyed 3 entire fleets. What part of that suggests they want peace?" The assembly erupted in discussion. Some species called for stronger diplomatic efforts. Others suggested economic incentives. The Kralith representative proposed a cultural exchange program to help the newcomers understand Coalition values. Only Elder Mordoon remained silent, watching the debate with sad eyes. Finally, the Coalition Supreme Chancellor, an elderly Thyllurian named Velsarn, called for order. "We will not abandon 2 centuries of peaceful progress because of one unfortunate incident. The Coalition will send a larger diplomatic mission with better translation equipment and more cultural advisors." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. "Chancellor, they're going to kill your diplomats too. That is a risk we must take to preserve our principles." After the meeting, Jake and Patricia found themselves alone with Commander Grant and Amy in a small briefing room. "They won't listen," Grant said quietly. "The entire Coalition leadership is convinced this can be solved through negotiation." Patricia pulled up intelligence reports on her tablet. "It gets worse. We've detected several Coalition species quietly evacuating their border worlds. They're preparing to run rather than fight. Can you blame them?" Amy asked. "After seeing what happened at Kepler Station?" Jake looked at her. "Captain, what happens when there's nowhere left to run?" Over the next few weeks, Jake received emergency authorization to begin training Coalition forces in human military doctrine. The authorization came not from Coalition leadership, but from individual fleet commanders who had seen the Kepler Station recordings and understood what they meant. The first training session was held on a Coalition military base in the outer system. Jake stood before a mixed group of alien officers, trying to explain concepts that had no equivalent in their peaceful society. "The key to understanding the Devourers is accepting that they don't want to negotiate," Jake began. "They want everything you have, and they're willing to take it by force." Lieutenant Ryan Clark, a young Coalition officer, raised his hand. "But surely there must be something they need that we can provide through trade." "Lieutenant, what they need is your worlds, your resources, and your people. They're not interested in sharing. They want it all." A Kralith officer clicked his mandibles nervously. "Human instructor, you speak of acceptable losses. This concept is disturbing to us. Every life has value." "I agree," Jake said. "But the Devourers don't share that belief. They'll sacrifice thousands of their own ships to destroy one of yours. If you're not willing to make hard choices, you'll lose everything." The training continued for days. Jake taught them about combined arms tactics, strategic withdrawal, and the psychological aspects of warfare. Most of the concepts were completely alien to species that had known only peace. Captain Lisa Stone, a human pilot assigned to the training program, worked with alien crews to teach them combat formations. "The hardest part isn't the flying, she told Jake after a particularly difficult session. It's getting them to think aggressively. They've been taught their whole lives that violence is never the answer. Meanwhile, General Hayes was working on a larger scale problem. She had been given access to coalition industrial capacity and was trying to convert peaceful infrastructure for military production. The good news is they have incredible manufacturing capability, she told Jake during one of their evening briefings. The bad news is it's all designed for civilian goods. We need weapons, armor, military-grade electronics. What's the resistance like? Massive. Half the coalition leadership thinks we're becoming as bad as the enemy. The other half thinks we're overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Jake rubbed his tired eyes. How long do we have? Devourer scouts have been detected entering coalition space. Maybe 6 weeks before the main fleet arrives. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elder Mordaunt contacted Jake privately, requesting a secret meeting in his small apartment. Young human, the old Thylorian said, there are others like me, survivors from the First War, who remember what it took to stop the Devourers. How many? Others? Not many. Most of my generation chose to forget. But some of us kept the old knowledge alive, hidden from the coalition authorities. Morden led Jake to a concealed section of his apartment, behind a wall that looked solid but opened at his touch. Inside was a small room filled with ancient weapons, tactical manuals, and strategic plans written in languages Jake didn't recognize. This is how we really defeated them the first time, Mordaunt said. Not through superior technology or noble tactics. We won because we were willing to become monsters to fight monsters. Jake studied the old battle plans. They were brutal in their efficiency. Entire star systems used as traps, civilian populations relocated to create kill zones, and tactics that sacrificed millions to save billions. The Coalition would never approve of this, Jake said. The Coalition will be extinct in 2 months if they don't approve of this, Mordaunt replied. The choice is simple. Become what you must to survive, or die with your principles intact. The news came 3 days later. A second diplomatic mission had been sent to contact the Devourer fleet. The mission consisted of 12 ships carrying the Coalition's finest diplomats, linguists, and cultural experts. All 12 ships were destroyed without ever transmitting a single message. The Devourers had learned from the first encounter. This time they didn't even let the diplomatic vessels get close enough to scan them. In the aftermath, something changed in the Coalition's leadership. Chancellor Velson called Jake and Patricia to an emergency meeting. The evidence is clear, the Chancellor said, his voice heavy with sadness. These beings are not interested in peaceful contact. What do you recommend? Patricia spread out tactical displays across the conference table. We implement strategic defense in depth. We turn key worlds into fortresses and make every system cost them dearly. We can't match their numbers, but we can make them pay for every light year they advance. The civilian casualties will be enormous, Chancellor Velson said. The casualties will be total if we don't act, Jake replied. Chancellor, they don't take prisoners. They don't occupy territory. They consume everything and move on. There's no middle ground here. The Chancellor was quiet for a long moment. Do what you must. But remember, if we save the galaxy by destroying what makes it worth saving, have we really won? Jake understood the question, but he also understood the alternative. Sir, we can rebuild civilization. Thyler Prime burned in the darkness of space. Jake watched from the command bridge as orbital defense platforms fired continuously at the approaching Devourer swarm. The planet's surface was covered with massive gun emplacements, underground, bunkers, and fortress cities designed for siege warfare. Devourer Advance Fleet has reached the outer defense ring, reported Lieutenant Ryan Clark, who had become Jake's aide after weeks of intensive combat training. Estimated 1,200 ships in the first wave. General Hayes stood beside Jake, studying the tactical display. Danny's fortress design is holding. Look at those kill ratios. Colonel Danny Roberts had spent the last month turning Thyler Prime into a nightmare for any attacking force. Every approach to the planet was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Underground tunnels connected defensive positions, allowing troops to move safely even under bombardment. The civilian population had been trained in guerrilla warfare and given orders to make the Devourers pay for every building, every street, every room. First contact with surface defenses, Clark reported. The display showed Devourer ships diving toward the planet like a swarm of angry insects. But instead of the easy victory they had achieved at Kepler Station, they flew into a storm of defensive fire. Missile batteries, plasma cannons, and railguns tore through their formations. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes, their wreckage, falling toward the planet's surface. But the Devourers kept coming. For every ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. They crashed their damaged vessels into defensive positions, turning their own ships into weapons. They landed troops in the middle of fortified zones, accepting massive casualties to establish footholds. This is what we expected, Jake said to his staff. They'll pay any price to win. The question is whether we can make that price high enough. Captain. Lisa Stone's voice crackled over the communication system from her fighter squadron. Jake, you need to see this. The Devourers aren't just attacking military targets. They're specifically going after civilian areas. Jake felt his stomach clench. Show me. The tactical display shifted to show Devourer ground forces advancing through the planet's capital city. But instead of heading for government buildings or military installations, they were systematically attacking hospitals, schools, and residential areas. They're trying to force us to spread our defenses thin, Patricia realized. They know we'll try to protect civilian populations. It's working, reported Major Frank Davis from the Surface Command Post. Half our reserves are being pulled away from key defensive positions to protect evacuation sites. Jake stared at the display, watching coalition forces rushing to defend. Civilians while Devourer heavy units advanced on critical infrastructure. It was a tactical nightmare with no good solutions. Sir, Clark said quietly, we could concentrate our forces on military objectives. Let the civilian areas ... No, Jake said firmly. We're not abandoning civilians, but we need a different approach. He opened a communication channel to Colonel Roberts on the surface. Danny, implement Protocol 7. Sir, that's... Are you sure? Do it. Patricia looked at him with concern. Jake, Protocol 7 will cost us thousands of civilian lives. And not implementing it will cost us millions. Protocol 7 was one of the brutal tactics Elder Mordon had shared from the first Devourer War. Instead of trying to defend everything, they would deliberately sacrifice parts of the planet to create killing fields. Entire city districts would be abandoned, their populations evacuated to underground shelters, while the surface became a trap for Devourer forces. All civilian populations in Sectors 7 through 12. Immediate evacuation to underground facilities, Roberts announced over the planetary communication system. Military units prepare for surface bombardment of abandoned sectors. The plan was horrifying in its simplicity. As Devourer forces occupied the abandoned city districts, coalition artillery and orbital weapons would turn those areas into wastelands. Any Devourers caught in the bombardment zones would be destroyed, but so would centuries of Thylorian culture and history. Beginning bombardment of Sector 7, reported the orbital weapons platform. Jake watched as plasma beams from space turned an entire district of the capital city into molten glass. Thousands of years of Thylorian architecture disappeared in minutes. Museums, art galleries, ancient temples, all reduced to slag, but it worked. Devourer forces that had occupied the district were completely destroyed. The survivors learned to avoid the abandoned sectors, concentrating their attacks on defended positions where coalition forces could fight them on more equal terms. Enemy casualties in Sector 7 bombardment estimated 8,000, Clark reported. Our casualties, 0. Over the following days, the battle for Thyler Prime became a grinding war of attrition. The Devourers held parts of the planet's surface, but every advance cost them heavily. Coalition forces fought from prepared positions, using the planet's geography and their own sacrificed territory against the enemy. Professor Kate Adams arrived on the command ship during the third day of fighting. She was a human historian who had been studying the political implications of the militarization campaign. "Jake," she said after reviewing the battle reports, "do you understand what you're doing to galactic civilization?" "I'm saving it," Jake replied, not looking away from the tactical displays. "Are you? Look at these reports. Peaceful research stations have become weapons factories. Diplomatic Corps members are being trained as spies. 3 coalition species have implemented mandatory military service for the first time in their history." Jake turned to face her. "Professor, in 6 months the Devourers will have consumed half the galaxy if we don't stop them here. But what kind of galaxy will we be saving? The coalition was built on principles of peace and cooperation. You're turning it into a military dictatorship. I'm turning it into something that can survive." Kate pulled up historical data on her tablet. Species that have never known violence are learning to make weapons. Children are being taught combat, tactics instead of art and literature. We're destroying 2 centuries of peaceful development. Patricia joined the conversation. "Professor, peace is a luxury you can only afford when everyone agrees to be peaceful. The Devourers changed the rules. Did they? Or did we change the rules because it was easier than finding a peaceful solution?" Jake felt his anger rising. There is no peaceful solution. They consume everything they encounter. They don't negotiate. They don't compromise. They don't even communicate. They just take. "And now we're becoming just like them," Kate said quietly. Before Jake could respond, alarms sounded throughout the ship. "Devourer reinforcements detected," Clark announced. "Estimated size, 40,000 ships." The main Devourer fleet had arrived at Thyler Prime. Through the viewports, Jake could see them approaching like a dark cloud, blotting out the stars. The advance force they had been fighting was just a scouting party. "Fleet Admiral Chun is requesting permission to engage," reported the communications officer. Admiral Chun had undergone the same transformation as the rest of the coalition military. Once a diplomatic peacekeeping commander, she had embraced human military doctrine and become one of Jake's most trusted fleet commanders. "Permission granted," Jake said. "All units implement the Thyler Defense Plan." The plan was based on Elder Mordune's ancient tactics, updated for modern technology. Coalition ships would not try to stop the Devourer fleet in open space. Instead, they would use hit-and-run attacks to draw enemy forces into carefully prepared kill zones around the planet. Chun's fleet is beginning harassment attacks on the enemy flanks, Clark reported. Jake watched as coalition ships darted in and out of the massive Devourer formation, striking at vulnerable targets and then withdrawing before the enemy could respond effectively. It was like watching wolves attack a herd of buffalo. Small, quick strikes designed to cause damage and confusion. "Devourer main force is taking the bait," Patricia observed. "They're pursuing Chun's ships toward the planetary defense grid." The Devourers had overwhelming numbers, but they were being drawn into a trap 200 years in the making. As they pursued the coalition fleet, they flew into overlapping fields of fire from orbital platforms, planetary surface weapons, and carefully positioned minefields. Contact with the primary defense grid, Clark announced, the space around Thyler. Prime erupted in violence. Thousands of weapons fired simultaneously as the Devourer fleet hit the main defensive perimeter. Ships exploded in chains of brilliant light, their debris creating new hazards for following vessels. But the Devourers kept coming. They accepted losses that would have broken any other military force, pushing through the defensive grid through sheer weight of numbers. "They're breaking through on the northern approach," reported Major Davis from the surface. Jake made another difficult decision. Implement Protocol 12. Evacuate the northern continent. Protocol 12 was even more brutal than the city bombardments. An entire continent would be abandoned to the Devourers, while coalition forces retreated to more defensible positions. Millions of civilians would lose their homes, their history, their entire way of life. "Sir," Clark said hesitantly, "the Phylorian government is requesting that we defend their cultural sites on the northern continent." 2 years after the victory at Thyler Prime, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the massive military station orbiting Earth. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the construction of the largest war fleet in galactic history. Thousands of ships filled the space around Earth, their hulls bristling with weapons designed according to human military principles. The galaxy had changed beyond recognition. The gentle coalition was gone, replaced by the Terran Galactic Republic. With Earth at its center, every major world was now a fortress. Every species had mandatory military service, and the peaceful ideals of 2 centuries had been abandoned for the harsh realities of survival. "The Devourer fleets have been pushed back to the Galactic Rim," reported Director Sam Mitchell, head of the new Galactic War Council. "Our latest offensive destroyed their main staging area in the outer spiral. Intelligence estimates they've lost 60% of their total forces." Jake nodded, but felt no satisfaction. The war was essentially over. Humanity had saved the galaxy by teaching it how to fight. But looking at the militarized civilization they had created, he wondered if the victory was worth the price. Admiral Betty Cooper entered the observation lounge, her uniform bearing the insignia of the new Galactic Fleet Command. She had been one of the first coalition officers to embrace human tactics, and now she commanded fleets larger than anything the old coalition had ever imagined. "Jake," she said, "the Andromeda expedition is ready to launch. 50,000 ships, fully equipped for deep space operations. If any Devourers escape to other galaxies, we'll find them." "And if we find inhabited worlds in Andromeda?" Jake asked. Betty paused. "We'll evaluate them for potential threats and act accordingly." Jake heard the unspoken meaning. The galaxy had learned to strike first and ask questions later. Any civilization that couldn't prove its peaceful intentions would be treated as a potential enemy. "Admiral, what happened to us?" Jake asked quietly. "We survived," Betty replied. "That's what happened." Later that day, Jake attended a meeting of the Galactic War Council. The council chamber was nothing like the old Coalition Assembly Hall, with its flowing curves and emphasis on harmony. This room was stark and functional, designed for making hard decisions quickly. The reconstruction of the devastated worlds is proceeding on schedule, reported General Hayes, who now oversaw planetary defense for the entire galaxy. All new colonies are being built according to Fortress World specifications. "What about the cultural restoration projects?" asked Professor Kate Adams, who had become the voice of those trying to preserve what remained of the old civilization. "Cultural sites will be rebuilt when military priorities allow," Director Mitchell replied dismissively. "Security comes first." Kate looked frustrated. "We're turning the entire galaxy into an armed camp. Children are learning to use weapons before they learn to read. Art and literature are being replaced by military manuals." And those children will be alive to learn to read because of those weapons, General Hayes said firmly. Jake listened to. A familiar argument. It had been going on for 2 years, ever since the war began. Those who remembered the peaceful galaxy versus those who understood the price of that peace. Ambassador Veltar, one of the few remaining Vorthic diplomats, spoke up. Supreme Commander Morrison, surely now that the immediate threat is over, we can begin returning to more civilized approaches to governance. Jake had been given the title of Supreme Commander after the Thyler Prime victory, making him effectively the military leader of the entire galaxy. It was a position he had never wanted and still wasn't comfortable with. Ambassador, Jake said, the Devourers came from beyond our galaxy once before. They were gone for 15,000 years, and everyone assumed they were extinct. Can you guarantee they won't return again? Nothing in life is guaranteed, Veltar replied, but we cannot live in permanent fear of possibilities. Can't we? Jake stood and walked to the large display showing the galaxy's current military disposition. Every world is now defended. Every system has early warning sensors. Every species maintains a military capable of real combat. For they, first time in galactic history, were actually safe. But at what cost? Kate asked. The Thylorian Great Library is gone forever. The Kralith Peace Gardens have been turned into training grounds. The Vorthic philosophical academies now teach military strategy instead of ethics. Jake felt the weight of every decision he had made over the past 2 years. Professor, would you prefer those places to exist in a galaxy ruled by the Devourers? I would prefer a galaxy where both could exist, beauty and security, art and defense. That galaxy was an illusion, General Hayes said. It only existed because no real threat had tested it. The moment something truly dangerous appeared, all that beauty and culture became irrelevant. After the meeting, Jake walked alone through the corridors of the station. Through the windows, he could see human-designed warships patrolling Earth's space. The planet below was no longer the quiet, peaceful world he had seen when he first awakened. Now it was the heavily fortified capital of a galactic military empire. He stopped at a memorial wall dedicated to those who had died in the war. Millions of names were inscribed on the black surface, representing every species that had fought against the Devourers. At the top of the list was Admiral Dizes, the Kralith commander who had died in the final battle of the war, still believing diplomacy could solve everything. Regrets? Asked Elder Mordoon, approaching from behind. Jake didn't turn around. Every day. Good, the old Thylorian said. The moment you stop regretting the hard choices is the moment you become like the enemy. Did we become like them anyway? Look at what we've built. A galaxy where might makes right, where military power determines policy, where entire civilizations exist only to serve the war machine. Mordon stood beside him, looking at the memorial. In my first life, before the Devourers came, I was a poet. I wrote about the beauty of peaceful worlds and the harmony between species. That poetry is gone now, lost with my world's libraries. Do you miss it? Every day. But I also know that without what we did, without what you taught us to become, there would be no poets anywhere. Sometimes the choice is not between good and evil, but between existence and extinction. Jake nodded slowly. The Coalition representatives want to know when we can return to peaceful governance. They want to disband the military, restore civilian control, go back to the way things were. And what do you tell them? I tell them that peace is what we have now, not the absence of weapons, but the presence of the means to defend ourselves. The old Coalition peace was built on hope and luck. The new peace is built on strength and vigilance. And they don't like that answer. No, they don't. The next morning brought reports from the Outer Rim territories. Human-led expeditions had discovered the ruins of dozens of civilizations beyond the galaxy's edge, all bearing the marks of devourer consumption. Entire star systems had been strip-mined to nothing, their planets reduced to empty space. This is what would have happened to us, Jake told the assembled War Council. This is why we had to change. But even as he spoke, Jake wondered about the cost of that change. The galaxy was safe, but it was no longer the gentle place he had awakened to. Children grew up learning tactics instead of art. Scientists designed weapons instead of exploring the mysteries of the universe. Diplomats carried guns and spoke of acceptable losses. Admiral Cooper presented the latest expansion plans. The outer rim fortifications are complete. We've established garrison fleets in every border system. No enemy force will ever again penetrate this deeply into galactic space. Director Mitchell added, colonial expansion is proceeding rapidly. We've established military colonies in 3 nearby galaxies, creating a buffer zone against future threats. Jake listened to the reports and realized that they had created something unprecedented, a galactic civilization built for permanent war. It was efficient, strong, and utterly different from the galaxy that had existed before. What about cultural development? Professor Adams asked, as she always did. Cultural activities will be encouraged as military duties allow, Director Mitchell replied, as he always did. Jake knew that this conversation would continue forever. Those who remembered the old ways would always push for a return to peaceful values. Those who understood the new reality would always insist on military preparedness. Thought about his conversation with Veltar the day before. The ambassador had asked when they could return to civilized governance. But Jake now understood that this was civilized governance, a civilization that could defend itself, that didn't depend on the mercy of its enemies, that would never again be caught unprepared. The devourers were gone, driven back to whatever dark space they had come from. But their legacy lived on in the galaxy they had forced to evolve. Every world was a fortress, every species a potential army, every decision filtered through the lens of survival. Jake walked to his office and sat down at his desk. Outside the window, construction crews were adding more weapon platforms to Earth's orbital defenses. In the distance, training exercises lit up the space around Mars. As new recruits learned to fight wars that might never come, he opened his personal journal and began to write.